Step away from the equipment. Hands where I can see them. Now!
Officer, lower your voice. I'm Dr. Althea Robinson. I run this district.
Yeah? Park's closed. You're trespassing. Don't move.
I have keys and ID. Call your supervisor right now.
That's it. Turn around. You're under arrest.
Officer Vance received a dispatch call regarding a suspicious individual possibly vandalizing equipment at the school. The caller sounded frantic, claiming a woman was shaking the structures and refusing to leave. To a seasoned officer, this might have sounded like a misunderstanding or perhaps a maintenance worker. But to Officer Vance, whose personnel file was already thick with complaints about aggressive posturing and a lack of discretion, it sounded like an opportunity for action. He sped toward the school lights flashing, mind already made up about what he would find. He didn't know that the suspicious person was Dr. Althea Robinson, the 54-year-old superintendent of the entire school district. He didn't know that she was the one who had secured the funding for that very playground. All he knew was that someone was where they shouldn't be, and he was going to be the one to remove them. What happened next? The shouting, the manhandling, the refusal to look at valid identification, and the sight of a distinguished community leader being shoved into the back of a squad car like a common criminal would become a viral sensation and a permanent stain on the department's history. Before we dive into the details of this catastrophic failure of judgment, I want to ask, where are you folks tuning in from today? Drop your city and state in the comments. And if you believe that authority should always be checked by accountability, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. We are building a community here dedicated to the truth, and we need you with us. The setting for this incident was deceptively peaceful. The Jefferson Elementary playground had been a construction zone for 6 months, wrapped in orange plastic fencing and "Keep Out" signs. It was a pet project of the district intended to be a state-of-the-art inclusive play area for the community. The grand opening was scheduled for Monday morning. The wood chips were fresh and smelled of cedar. The bright blue and yellow jungle gym gleamed under the Saturday sun. It was silent, empty of children waiting for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Dr. Althea Robinson stood by the swing set, a clipboard in one hand and a digital tablet in the other. At 54, Dr. Robinson was a woman of immense presence. She stood 5'9" with posture that spoke of decades in boardrooms and lecture halls. She was dressed in a tailored navy pantsuit with a silk scarf tied elegantly around her neck, her silver-streaked hair pulled back into a neat professional bun. She didn't look like a vandal. She didn't look like a loiterer. She looked like exactly what she was, the highest-ranking education official in the county. Althea had risen before dawn that Saturday. She was a perfectionist, a trait that had propelled her from a classroom teacher in the inner city to the superintendent's office. This playground renovation had been plagued by contractor delays and budget overruns, and she had personally intervened to get it across the finish line. She wasn't about to let the Monday morning press conference be ruined by a loose bolt or a jagged edge. She was there to perform a final punch list inspection. She wanted to walk the grounds alone without the noise of her staff or the contractors to ensure everything was safe for the children. She gripped the chain of a swing and gave it a firm tug, testing the tension. She moved to the slide, running her hand along the rail to check for burrs in the metal. She was methodical, focused, and completely within her rights. In fact, she had the master keys to the gate in her pocket. She was the landlord, the manager, and the visionary behind the project. But to the eyes of a biased observer, context didn't matter. Dr. Robinson had spent 30 years building a reputation for excellence. She held a PhD in educational leadership from Columbia University. Before coming to Charleston, she had served as a state administrator, turning around 3 failing school districts in 5 years. When she was hired by Charleston, the district was on the brink of financial insolvency. In just 4 years, she had balanced the budget-raised teacher salaries and approved infrastructure projects like the Jefferson Playground. She was tough fare and commanded respect from anyone who actually took the time to speak with her. However, respect is often a visual currency, and in our society it is distributed unevenly. Althea knew this. It was why she never left her house without being impeccably dressed. It was why she spoke with precise diction. It was why she drove a sensible, clean sedan, which was currently parked in the faculty lot. She knew that as a black woman in a position of power, she had to work twice as hard to be seen as half as competent. But even she couldn't have predicted that on a quiet Saturday morning in the district she ran her credentials would be rendered invisible by the prejudices of a stranger. That stranger was Jared Thorne. Thorne lived in a 2-story colonial that backed right up to the school property. He was 34 years old, a software sales representative who spent most of his weekends sitting on his back deck nursing a coffee and watching the neighborhood with a critical eye. Thorne was the type of neighbor who measured the grass height of the lawn next door and checked the HOA bylaws if a trash can was left out too long. He had been complaining about the playground construction noise for months, writing nasty emails to the school board emails that had ultimately landed on Dr. Robinson's desk, though she had politely addressed them. On this particular morning, Thorne was bored. He looked over his fence and saw a figure moving around the closed playground. He didn't see the tailored suit or the clipboard. He saw a black woman pulling on the swings and shaking the slide. In his mind, the narrative wrote itself instantly. She was up to no good. She was breaking things. She was one of those people who didn't respect property. He watched her for about 2 minutes, his irritation growing into self-righteous anger. He didn't call out to ask what she was doing. He didn't walk over to the fence. He pulled out his phone and dialed 911. 911, what is your emergency? Yeah, I need a cop at Jefferson Elementary immediately. Thorne said, his voice pitched high with feigned urgency. There's someone trespassing on the new playground. They're tearing the place up. Is the person armed? Are they threatening anyone? I don't see a weapon, but she's going crazy on the equipment, shaking it violently. She's probably on drugs or something. It's a black female, maybe 40s or 50s. She's definitely not supposed to be there. The park is closed. Okay, sir. We have an officer in the vicinity. We'll send someone over. Hurry up before she destroys the whole thing, Thorne added before hanging up. Thorne sat back, feeling a surge of satisfaction. He had done his civic duty. He had protected the neighborhood. He took a sip of his coffee and waited for the show, completely unaware that he had just set in motion a chain of events that would humiliate him publicly and cost the taxpayers millions. Officer Kyle Vance was only 6 blocks away when the call came through. As he listened to the dispatcher relay the details, trespassing potential vandalism subject is a black female, possibly intoxicated or disturbed. His grip tightened on the steering wheel. Vance had a specific view of policing that relied heavily on domination. He believed that respect was something you demanded, not something you earned. In his 3 years on the force, he had developed a reputation among his colleagues. Some called him proactive. Others, the older veterans who knew better, called him a liability. Vance's record was a minefield of red flags. There were 7 complaints in his file. One involved him tackling a teenager for skateboarding in a parking lot. Another involved him drawing his taser on a grandfather who was arguing a parking ticket. In every instance, Vance had escalated the situation, turning minor misunderstandings into major conflicts. But the department, struggling with staffing shortages and a powerful union, had opted for retraining and written reprimands rather than termination. They kept hoping he would mature. They were wrong. As Vance pulled his cruiser up to the curb of Jefferson Elementary, he didn't check the license plate of the sedan in the lot. He didn't pause to observe the subject's behavior. He saw a black woman standing by the monkey bars tapping on a tablet. The disconnect between the dispatch description, going crazy on equipment, and the reality, a woman working quietly, didn't register. His confirmation bias was already locked in. He slammed the car door shut, adjusted his utility belt, and marched across the grass, bypassing the sidewalk entirely. He didn't approach with a question. He approached with a command. "Hey, you!" Vance shouted from 30 yards away. "Step away from the equipment!" Dr. Robinson looked up, startled. She shielded her eyes against the sun to see the uniformed officer storming toward her. Her first instinct wasn't fear. It was confusion. She assumed there had been an accident nearby, or perhaps a security alarm she had tripped. "Good morning, officer," she called back, her voice calm and authoritative. "Is there a problem?" "I said, step away from the equipment and put your hands where I can see them." Vance bellowed, closing the distance rapidly. His hand was resting on his holstered taser. "Officer, there is no need to shout," Althea said, standing her ground. She lowered her clipboard but kept her posture erect. "I am Dr. Althea Robinson. I am the superintendent of this school district." Vance stopped 5 feet from her, invading her personal space. He looked her up and down, sneering. "Yeah, and I'm the mayor. The park is closed, lady. Can't you read the signs you're trespassing?" "I am not trespassing," Althea said, her tone sharpening. "I am inspecting the property. I have the keys to the gate right here in my pocket." She moved her hand slowly toward her blazer pocket. "Don't you move!" Vance screamed, stepping back and unsnapping the retention strap on his holster. "Keep your hands out. You're creating a disturbance." "The only person creating a disturbance is you, officer," Althea said, her heart beginning to pound. She realized with a sinking feeling that this man wasn't listening. He wasn't looking at her suit. He wasn't hearing her diction. He was seeing a threat. "I am telling you I am the district superintendent. My ID is in my bag on that bench. If you will allow me to retrieve it, we can resolve this." "I don't want to see your fake ID," Vance spat. "We got a call that you're out here destroying public property. I saw you pulling on those swings." "I was testing the structural integrity," Althea exclaimed, exasperated. "That is my job. Now please lower your voice and let me show you my credentials." "You're not showing me anything except your back," Vance said, his face flushing red. "I'm giving you a lawful order. Leave the premises now or you're going to jail." Althea Robinson stared at him. She had negotiated with union leaders, faced down angry parents, and managed multi-million-dollar budgets. She was not accustomed to being bullied by a man young enough to be her son. "I am not leaving," she said clearly. "I am the legal administrator of this site. You are making a grave error, officer. I suggest you call your supervisor." That was the trigger. To a man like Kyle Vance, a suggestion to call a supervisor was a direct challenge to his manhood. It was an insult. "That's it," Vance growled. "You're under arrest." He lunged forward, grabbing Dr. Robinson by the wrist. The clipboard fell to the ground, clattering against the metal slide. "Do not touch me!" Althea shouted, pulling back. "You are assaulting a public official." "Stop resisting," Vance yelled, using the catchphrase that justifies so much unnecessary force. He spun her around, wrenching her arm behind her back with enough force to strain her shoulder. Althea gasped in pain, her glasses sliding down her nose. By this time, 2 people walking their dogs on the sidewalk had stopped. They were a middle-aged couple locals who knew the neighborhood. They didn't see a vandal. They saw a police officer manhandling a well-dressed woman. The husband pulled out his phone and started recording. "Hey," the man shouted from the sidewalk. "Take it easy. She's not fighting you. Back up." Vance screamed at the witnesses, not looking away from Althea. "Interfere and you're next." He shoved Althea against the bright yellow support pole of the jungle gym. The cold steel pressed against her cheek. "Officer," Althea said, her voice shaking with rage but controlled. "My name is Dr. Althea Robinson. You are arresting the superintendent of schools on her own property. This will cost you your badge. I promise you that." "Tell it to the judge," Vance muttered. He ratcheted the handcuffs too tight around her wrists. The metal bit into her skin. He didn't double-lock them. He grabbed her by the arm and marched her across the wood chips, her polished shoes scuffing in the dirt. "I have identification," she repeated. "It is right there." "I said shut up," Vance said. He dragged her to the cruiser, opened the back door, and pushed her inside. The space was cramped and smelled of stale sweat and vinyl. As the door slammed shut, separating her from the world, Althea Robinson took a deep breath. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She began to memorize every detail. The time, the officer's nameplate, the number of the patrol car. Jared Thorne, watching from his deck, felt a sudden pit in his stomach. The woman was dressed nicely. She hadn't looked like a crackhead when the cop walked her out. And why were people filming? He put his coffee down, the thrill of the bust, suddenly replaced by a gnawing anxiety that he had miscalculated. The ride to the precinct was short only about 10 minutes. Officer Vance drove with the radio off, adrenaline pumping through his veins. He felt powerful. He had neutralized a threat. He glanced in the rearview mirror. The suspect was sitting perfectly still, staring out the window with a look of icy detachment. She didn't look scared. She looked waiting. It was unnerving, but Vance brushed it off. They always acted tough until they got to the holding cell. Althea watched the city pass by. She saw the high school she had authorized a new library for. She saw the community center where she volunteered. She was the superintendent. She was a pillar of this community. And she was in handcuffs because a man with a badge and a gun couldn't conceive of a world where a black woman belonged in charge. They arrived at the North Precinct. Vance pulled into the sally port, the garage door rumbling shut behind them. He hauled Althea out of the car. "Let's go," he said, gripping her arm again. "I am walking," Althea said coldly. "Unhand me." He led her through the heavy steel doors and into the processing area. It was a busy Saturday. Several officers were at desks. A few civilians were waiting on benches. At the main desk sat Sergeant Miller. Sergeant Tom Miller was 58 years old, a 30-year veteran of the force. He was tired, nearing retirement, and he knew just about everyone in town who mattered. He had spent countless hours in school board meetings coordinating security for football games and graduations. He looked up as the door opened, his eyes scanning the new arrival. He froze. His coffee cup paused halfway to his mouth. He blinked, sure that his eyes were playing tricks on him. He looked at the woman in the handcuffs, the navy suit, the silver-streaked hair, the familiar face that had been on the front page of the local paper just last week regarding the new STEM program. "Vance," Miller said, his voice quiet, trembling with a mixture of disbelief and horror. "What? What do you have there?" "Trespassing, resisting, disorderly conduct," Vance announced proudly, pushing Althea forward. "Caught her tearing up the new playground at Jefferson Elementary, refused to ID, tried to fight me." Sergeant Miller stood up slowly. His face went pale, then a deep, terrifying shade of red. "Vance," Miller said, coming around the desk. "Take those cuffs off. Right, now." Vance looked confused. "Sarge, she's a suspect. She was—" "That is the superintendent of the school district, you absolute moron!" Miller roared, his voice echoing off the cinderblock walls. The entire station went dead silent. Typewriters stopped. Conversations halted. Vance froze. He looked at Althea. He looked at Miller. Who? "Dr. Robinson," Miller said, rushing over to Althea. "Dr. Robinson, I am so sorry." He grabbed Vance's shoulder and shoved him aside physically. "Give me the keys. Now." Vance fumbled for his keys, his hands suddenly shaking. The color drained from his face as the reality of what he had done crashed down on him. Miller unlocked the cuffs. Althea rubbed her wrists where deep red indentations were already forming. She adjusted her blazer, smoothed her scarf, and looked directly at Officer Vance. "Officer Vance," she said, her voice echoing in the silent room. "You refused to look at my identification. You refused to listen to my explanation. You assaulted me, and you kidnapped me from a site that I manage." I didn't know," Vance stammered. "You didn't look like—" "I didn't look like what?" Althea challenged him, stepping closer. "I didn't look like a superintendent, or I didn't look like a person who deserves basic civil rights." Vance had no answer. He looked at Sergeant Miller seeking help, but found only fury. "Badge and gun, Vance," Miller said, his voice low and dangerous. "Put them on the desk. You're done for the day. Get in the captain's office and don't you dare come out until I tell you." The aftermath was swift, brutal, and expensive. The video from the couple walking their dogs hit the internet before Althea had even left the police station. It showed everything: the aggression, the calm responses from Dr. Robinson, the unnecessary force. The title of the video was "Charleston Cop Assaults School Superintendent." It had 1 million views by sunset. The community outrage was explosive. Parents who knew and loved Dr. Robinson flooded the mayor's phone lines. The teachers' union threatened to strike if Vance wasn't terminated. But the real hammer dropped when Dr. Robinson's legal team filed the lawsuit. It wasn't just about the arrest. It was about the systemic failure that allowed an officer with 7 prior complaints to remain on the street. Jared Thorne, the neighbor, was not spared. The 911 tape was released. His description of a woman going crazy and destroying property was juxtaposed with the security camera footage from the school, which showed Althea gently testing a swing. Thorne was doxxed, fired from his sales job for making a racially motivated false report, and faced charges for filing a false police report. He became a pariah in the neighborhood he claimed to be protecting. The city of Charleston settled with Dr. Althea Robinson for $4 million to avoid a jury trial that they knew they would lose. But Althea didn't just take the money and retire. As part of the settlement, she demanded a complete overhaul of the police department's hiring and retention policies. She mandated independent oversight for all use-of-force complaints. She forced the city to implement a duty-to-intervene policy for other officers. Officer Kyle Vance was fired 3 weeks later. The internal investigation was scathing. He was stripped of his certification, ensuring he could never work in law enforcement in the state again. At 29, his career was over, a casualty of his own arrogance. But money and policy changes don't erase the memory of the cold steel against your cheek. They don't undo the feeling of being powerless in the face of a man with a gun who sees you as a threat first and a human being second. Dr. Robinson returned to work the next Monday for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. She stood on that playground, her wrist wrapped in a bandage, and cut the ribbon. She smiled for the cameras, but those close to her saw the shadow in her eyes. We have to ask ourselves, folks, how many Dr. Robinsons are out there who don't have the title superintendent to save them? How many people are sitting in a cell right now because an officer like Vance decided they didn't look like they belonged? This story isn't just about bad policing. It's about the assumptions we make. It's about the neighbor who sees a criminal instead of a caretaker. It's about the officer who sees a suspect instead of a citizen. It's about the fragility of dignity when it collides with bias. Dr. Robinson walked away with millions, but she shouldn't have had to go through hell to get it. What do you think should happen to callers like Jared Thorne who weaponized the police? And do you think the settlement was enough? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to support this channel and help us bring more of these stories to light, please hit that like button and subscribe. Until next time, stay safe and watch out for each other.
Hey, you can't be here. Move along.
I'm
Now.
in a public park during open hours. I'm not breaking the law.
I didn't ask for an argument. I asked for ID.
You have no reasonable suspicion. I do not consent.
So now you're refusing orders? Turn around. Hands behind your
I am
back.
Brannigan was 29 years old, 5 years into a career that had been marked by a high number of self-initiated stops and a disturbing amount of citizen complaints that had been dismissed by a lenient union review board. He parked his cruiser on the grass, a violation of city ordinance in itself, and adjusted his utility belt. He saw a black male in a wheelchair lingering near the Vietnam War memorial wall. The dispatch call had been vague. A resident in the high-end condos across the street had reported, "Someone looking suspicious near the statues." That was it. No crime, no threat, just existence. But for Brannigan, that was enough. As he walked across the manicured lawn, his hand rested habitually near his holster. He didn't see a man paying respects to fallen brothers. He saw a problem to be removed. Before we get into the details of this infuriating encounter, I need you to take a second. Look at where you are right now. Imagine you are visiting a grave or a memorial for someone you loved, and a stranger with a gun demands you justify your presence. It's a nightmare scenario, but for many, it's a Tuesday. If you believe our veterans deserve respect and that police power must be checked, hit that subscribe button right now. You need to see how this ends. Colonel Thorne didn't hear Brannigan approach immediately. He was focused on the name Elijah Washington etched into the brass plate. Elijah had been his radio operator in 1983. Thorne came here every Tuesday at 11:00 a.m. to polish the brass and talk to his old friend. It was a ritual. It was therapy. "Hey, buddy, you can't sleep here." The voice was loud, jarring, and dripping with condescension. Thorne stopped polishing. He didn't turn around immediately. He carefully folded his polishing cloth and placed it in the small saddlebag attached to his customized titanium wheelchair. He took a breath, centering himself before engaging the wheel locks and pivoting the chair to face the officer. Thorne looked up. He saw the name tag, Brannigan, and the aggressive stance. Thorne's face was a map of lived experience, a scar running along his jawline eyes that had seen the worst of humanity and remained steady. "I'm not sleeping, officer." Thorne said, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that had once commanded battalions. "I am maintaining the memorial." Brannigan smirked. He looked at the bottle of brass polish and the rag. He didn't see a community service. He saw paraphernalia. "Yeah, well, we've had reports of vagrants using this park to shoot up and harass residents. I'm going to need you to move along." Thorne's hands rested on his lap. He didn't fidget. He didn't look down. "I am a tax-paying resident of this city, officer. I am in a public park during open hours. I am not violating any ordinances." Brannigan's smile faded. He wasn't used to vagrants using words like ordinances. He stepped closer, invading Thorne's personal space, a tactical intimidation move that usually worked on the desperate and the addicted. "I didn't ask for a law lecture, pal. I said move along. Actually, before you do, let me see some ID. We need to make sure you don't have any warrants." This was the pivot point. The moment where a good officer would have realized his mistake, apologized, and thanked the veteran for cleaning the memorial. But Brannigan wasn't a good officer. He was a bully with a badge, and he had just picked a fight with a man whose thesis on asymmetrical warfare was required reading at the War College. Thorne remained perfectly still. He knew exactly what was happening. It was a Terry stop, an investigatory detention. But for a Terry stop to be legal, the officer needed reasonable, articulable suspicion that a crime had been committed, was being committed, or was about to be committed. "Officer Brannigan," Thorne said, reading the name tag aloud to signal he was documenting the interaction. "I am declining your request. I am not operating a motor vehicle. I am not suspected of a specific crime. Unless you can articulate a reasonable suspicion based on facts, not hunches, I am under no legal obligation to identify myself." Brannigan's face flushed a deep, angry red. The air in the park seemed to grow heavier. A few pedestrians walking their dogs on the nearby path stopped. They sensed the tension. A woman in her 50s stopped pushing her stroller and watched. Thorne noticed the audience. He hoped they were paying attention. "You want reasonable suspicion?" Brannigan snapped his hand, moving to his radio. "You fit the description of a suspicious person reported in the area. And now you're refusing a lawful order. That's obstruction. A description of a black man in a wheelchair is not a description of a suspect officer. That is a demographic profile." Thorne corrected him, his voice remaining level, which only seemed to infuriate Brannigan more. "And asserting my Fourth Amendment rights is not obstruction. The Supreme Court has been very clear on this. I suggest you call your supervisor before you make a mistake that you cannot undo." Brannigan laughed, a short, nervous sound. "I don't need a supervisor to handle a trespasser. You're detained. Give me the ID or I take you in and we figure out who you are the hard way." Thorne leaned back in his chair. He looked Brannigan in the eye. "I am not trespassing on public property. I have committed no crime. I am free to go, or you are detaining me illegally." "Which is it?" The gathered crowd was growing. A man in a business suit had pulled out his phone and was filming. Brannigan saw the phone. Instead of checking his behavior, he doubled down, convinced that backing off now would make him look weak in front of the civilians. He decided that he was going to teach this cripple a lesson about respect. "Okay, have it your way," Brannigan said, unclipping his handcuffs. "Turn around. Hands behind your back." "I cannot turn around, officer. I am paraplegic, and my chair is customized for my specific injuries. If you attempt to remove me from it, you will cause me significant physical harm," Thorne stated. He wasn't pleading. He was stating a fact for the record, for the camera he knew was watching. Brannigan didn't listen. He moved behind the wheelchair. "You're under arrest for obstruction of justice and disorderly conduct." He grabbed Thorne's left wrist and wrenched it backward. Thorne winced a sharp intake of breath through his nose as the torque hit an old shrapnel injury in his shoulder. "Officer, stop!" the man in the business suit yelled from the sidewalk. "He's in a wheelchair. What are you doing?" Brannigan ignored the bystander. "Stop resisting," Brannigan shouted, playing to the camera, pretending a struggle was happening where there was none. Thorne was not resisting. He went limp, a passive resistance technique he had been trained in to minimize injury. Brannigan struggled to get the cuffs on because of the angle of the chair. Frustrated, the officer made a decision that would sicken the jury months later. He released the brake on the wheelchair and spun it roughly to get better leverage, nearly tipping it over. "I am warning you," Thorne said through gritted teeth, the pain in his shoulder radiating down his spine. "You are damaging expensive medical equipment and violating my civil rights. My name is Colonel Marcus Thorne, United States Marine Corps retired. Check your ego, son." Brannigan paused for a microsecond at the word colonel, but his adrenaline was too high. He didn't believe it. He saw a man in sweatpants. "Sure you are. And I'm General Patton. You're going downtown." Brannigan finally managed to click the cuffs onto Thorne's wrists, forcing his arms into an agonizing position behind the rigid backrest of the chair. Then came the logistics. Brannigan realized he couldn't put the wheelchair in the back of his sedan. He called for a transport van, but the dispatcher said it was 20 minutes out. Impatient and angry, Brannigan decided he would assist Thorne into the back of the cruiser and leave the chair. "Get up," Brannigan commanded. "I just told you I am a paraplegic," Thorne said, sweat beading on his forehead from the pain. "I cannot stand." Brannigan rolled his eyes. "Fine, I'll help you." He grabbed Thorne by the upper arms and hauled him out of the chair. Thorne's legs, dead weight, dragged across the asphalt. The toe of his right sneaker caught on the curb, twisting his foot at a sickening angle. Thorne didn't scream, but he let out a guttural groan. The bystanders were shouting now. "He's disabled. You're hurting him." The woman with the stroller was on her phone calling 911 to report a police officer. Brannigan shoved Thorne into the back seat of the cruiser. Thorne's legs wouldn't bend properly to fit. Brannigan slammed the door twice before he managed to jam Thorne's limbs inside. The expensive custom titanium wheelchair worth $8,000 was left sitting on the grass. Brannigan tossed it into the trunk, not bothering to fold it properly, hearing the frame crunch as he slammed the lid. The drive to the precinct was short. Brannigan blasted the air conditioning, trying to cool his own temper. Thorne sat in the back, handcuffed in excruciating pain, his legs rapidly swelling. He closed his eyes and began to memorize every turn, every speed bump, every second of the timeline. He wasn't a prisoner. He was an operative gathering intelligence. He needed to survive the next hour so he could destroy this man's career legally. When Brannigan arrived at the precinct, he dragged Thorne out of the car with the same lack of care. He wheeled him into the booking area in a borrowed, broken-down transport chair from the garage because he couldn't get Thorne's custom chair out of the trunk easily. The booking room was busy. Officers were typing reports, drinking coffee, chatting. The atmosphere changed the moment Brannigan wheeled Thorne in. The desk sergeant was Thomas Miller, a 58-year-old bear of a man who had served in the Army before joining the force 30 years ago. He looked over the counter and saw Brannigan pushing a black man in a hospital chair, handcuffed, wearing sweatpants. Miller's eyes narrowed. He looked at the man's face. He knew that face. He had seen that face in the local paper 2 years ago when the city unveiled the new war memorial. Brannigan. Miller said, his voice low and dangerous. What do you have there? Obstruction and disorderly, Brannigan said, wiping sweat from his brow. Guy wouldn't ID at the park, was acting belligerent, claimed he was some kind of colonel. Brannigan chuckled, expecting Miller to share the joke. Miller didn't laugh. He walked out from behind the high desk. He walked straight to Thorne. He looked at the wristbands, then he looked at the man. Sir, Miller asked. Colonel Thorne. Sergeant, Thorne replied calmly, though his face was gray with pain. I believe your officer has made a significant error in judgment. My wallet is in my back pocket. I would like you to retrieve it and look at the ID card behind my driver's license. Miller nodded. He reached into Thorne's pocket with gentle hands. He pulled out the wallet. He flipped past the driver's license and found the Department of Defense Common Access card, retired status, rank colonel, and tucked behind it a laminated card indicating he was a recipient of the Silver Star and a Purple Heart. Miller looked up at Brannigan. The look was one of pure pity and disgust. Brannigan, Miller said softly, give me your keys. What? Brannigan asked, confused. Give me your keys, now. Miller snatched the keys from the younger officer's hand and unlocked Thorne's handcuffs. Colonel, I need to get you medical attention immediately. Did he injure you? My legs were dragged, Thorne said, rubbing his wrists. And my wheelchair is currently being crushed in the trunk of his vehicle. But before we discuss medical attention, Sergeant, I want a supervisor. I want the watch commander, and I want the chief. I'm calling them now, Miller said. He turned to Brannigan. Go sit in the break room. Don't speak to anyone. Don't write anything. Just sit there and pray you still have a pension by tomorrow. Brannigan stood there, stunned. Sarge, he was loitering. He refused ID. He's a decorated war hero who lost the use of his legs fighting for the Constitution you just wiped your feet on. Miller roared, his voice echoing off the cinder block walls. Get out of my sight. 5 minutes later, the precinct was in chaos. The watch commander had called the chief of police, Chief Robert Henderson, who was at a luncheon downtown. Henderson arrived in 12 minutes. He found Colonel Thorne sitting in the captain's office, not in a cell. Sergeant Miller had provided him with water and ice packs for his wrists. Thorne's custom wheelchair had been retrieved from the trunk. The frame was bent, the axle damaged. It sat in the corner as piece of evidence number 1. Chief Henderson was a pragmatic man. He saw the bent wheelchair. He saw the colonel's calm, furious demeanor. He saw the liability. Colonel Thorne, Henderson began, extending a hand. I am deeply sorry for this. This is unacceptable, doesn't begin to cover it. We are going to release you immediately. No charges will be filed. I can have an officer drive you home or to the hospital. Thorne didn't shake the chief's hand. He looked at it until Henderson awkwardly withdrew it. Chief Henderson, Thorne said, I don't want to ride home. I want the event number. I want the body camera footage preserved. I want the dash cam footage. I want the dispatch logs. And I want the name of the officer who arrested me. We will handle this internally, Colonel. I assure you Officer Brannigan will be disciplined. Discipline is for a uniform violation, Thorne said, cold as ice. This was a violation of my civil rights. It was assault. It was battery. And it was kidnapping. I am not going to let you handle this internally. I am going to make this a matter of public record. I want digital copies of all evidence provided to my attorney by 9:00 a.m. tomorrow. Do I have your word, or do I need to call the FBI Civil Rights Division right now from this office? Henderson swallowed hard. He knew who Thorne was now. He knew Thorne sat on the board of Veterans Affairs. He knew Thorne had the mayor's personal cell number. You'll have everything, Colonel. Thorne left the station an hour later. He didn't take a police ride. He called his wife, a retired surgeon who came in their accessible van. When she saw the bruises on his wrists and the bent wheelchair, she didn't cry. She went silent, a dangerous protective silence. They went straight to the ER to document the injuries: soft tissue damage, a hairline fracture in the toe that had caught the curb, and nerve compression in the wrists. By Wednesday morning, the lawsuit was filed. Thorne v. City of San Diego et al. The document was a masterpiece of legal writing drafted by the city's top civil rights firm, who had taken the case pro bono within 10 minutes of hearing the story. The allegations included unlawful detention, excessive force violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act (ADA), and racial profiling. But the real explosion happened when the video released. Thorne's team didn't wait. The moment the city turned over the footage, they released it to the press. The video of Brannigan dumping a paralyzed veteran out of his chair and dragging him across the sidewalk hit the internet like a bomb. It was viewed 4 million times in the first 24 hours. The image of the empty wheelchair sitting on the grass while the cruiser drove away became a symbol. The media narrative was relentless. Hero treated like trash. Wheelchair war veteran arrested for existing while black. Reporters dug into Brannigan's file. They found what the Internal Affairs Division had ignored: 6 complaints in 3 years, 4 involving black men, 2 involving homeless individuals, 1 involving a deaf woman whom Brannigan had arrested for ignoring commands because she couldn't hear him. The pattern was undeniable. The discovery phase of the lawsuit was a bloodbath for the city. Thorne's lawyers deposed Brannigan. Under oath, the young officer crumbled. He admitted he didn't know the specific criteria for a Terry stop. He admitted he assumed Thorne was homeless because of his clothes. He admitted he hadn't seen any drug paraphernalia despite his initial claims. The city attorney watched the deposition and signaled to the mayor settle. Now, they couldn't put Brannigan on a stand in front of a jury. A jury would give Thorne $10 million just out of spite. The city offered $500,000. Thorne rejected it. They offered $800,000. Thorne rejected it. It's not about the money, Thorne told his lawyer. It's about the cost. It has to hurt enough that they change the training. Finally, the city caved. They agreed to a settlement of $1.2 million. But Thorne had non-monetary conditions. Brannigan had to be terminated. The city had to agree to report the termination to the state post board to decertify him, ensuring he could never be a cop again in that state. And the department had to implement a new training module on interacting with citizens with disabilities designed by a committee Thorne would select. On the day the settlement was signed, Brannigan was already gone. He had been fired 2 weeks prior, the union refusing to fight for him after the drag video made him a national pariah. He was working at a warehouse loading boxes, a job he would eventually lose when his coworkers found out who he was. Colonel Thorne took the $1.2 million check. He wrote 2 checks that same day. The first, for $600,000, went to the Legal Defense Fund for Disabled Veterans, a nonprofit he helped establish. The second, for $400,000, went to the local Boys and Girls Club to build a new tech center. He kept enough to replace his wheelchair and cover his medical bills. The Thorne Protocol is now standard training for the police department. It requires officers to have specific articulable facts before approaching a disabled person and mandates that mobility devices be treated as extensions of the person's body. The footage of that day is still online. It serves as a grim reminder of what happens when authority goes unchecked. But it also serves as a reminder of the dignity of resistance. Colonel Thorne returned to the park 3 months later. He had a new wheelchair. He brought his polishing cloth. He sat in front of Elijah Washington's nameplate polishing the brass until it shone like gold. A rookie police officer walked by on foot patrol. He saw the colonel. He didn't ask for ID. He didn't tell him to move. He stopped, stood at attention, and saluted. Colonel Thorne didn't look up, but he nodded. The system didn't work because it wanted to. It worked because one man refused to be broken, refused to be intimidated, and had the courage to force the system to look in the mirror. What hits you hardest about this story? Is it the officer's arrogance or the fact that it took a colonel's rank to get justice when a regular citizen might have been ignored? We need to talk about this. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe that badge cams should be mandatory and uneditable for every officer in America, like this video and subscribe. We are building a community that demands accountability. Until next time, stay safe and know your rights.